The Innovators Network.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovators Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are here in the studio. If you've been following us for a while, you know the last few segments of the show have been solo shows with me, talking about things like out-of-the-box thinking. We did 2 segments on that. Last week's show was about in-the-box thinking, which is something that a lot of innovators don't think about. We all think about that the best ideas come from out of the box. But in some cases, you have to live within certain constraints. Some of the constraints that I described were things from, the way things are just occur within an industry. And in some cases, it could be regulatory requirements. It could be, requirements for, if you was in healthcare, could be medical practice defined requirements that you have to continue to operate in. And with that in mind, we are going to have an interesting conversation today with a guest. Today's guest is Dave Fabry. Dave is the Chief Innovation Officer at Starkey. If you're not familiar with Starkey, Starkey is really the only U.S.-based incumbent hearing aid manufacturer. And in fact, for those of you who've met me out in public or I've spoken at your events or whatever, I wear hearing aids, particularly when doing Q&A from the stage. I have learned I have to be wearing my hearing aids or I can't hear the questions. But I'm one of those people. I've had my hearing aids now for I've been in hearing aids for, it's got to be 12, 15 years now. And I can talk later about why I needed hearing aids. I know exactly what happened that caused it. But more and more people can benefit from these kinds of technologies. So, but innovating in an area which a lot of people kind of think, how much more can you really squeeze into hearing aids? Look, there's a lot of room to innovate in anything and everything. So, Dave, thanks for taking the time to join us here at Killer Innovations.
It's my pleasure, Phil. Thanks for having me.
So, Dave, you and I met actually, I guess it was a couple years ago, or not this last CS, but the CS before. You came by the mobile studio, and we had a chance to meet and we've stayed in touch and kept up, and I've been watching some of your new product announcements. But you're not the typical chief innovation officer.
No.
You don't come from what I would call a hardcore tech background, but you come from the audio side coming up through audiology and then actually getting a PhD in audiology that then moved you over to the Chief Innovation Officer. Give us a little bit of your background. Why audiology? What was the thing that kind of got you started down this path?
Yeah, it's interesting, and thank you for that. But a lot of people don't grow up wanting to be an audiologist. Certainly at my age, I turned 60 last year, and audiology was still a relatively young discipline. It was founded really right after World War II. I was actually first in my family to go to college and grew up wanting to be a veterinarian, but found audiology through a pathway through my animal background in doing research undergraduate at the University of Minnesota. I continued and got my bachelor's degree in experimental psych and then headed into audiology, but thinking that I was going to be an academician. And what changed my path was when I went to Mayo Clinic as an extern in the early 1980s and really fell in love with this whole idea of clinical practice and working directly one-on-one with individuals like yourself who have hearing loss, but in many cases are somewhat reluctant to wear amplification. And so I started down that path and then returned to get my PhD in hearing science, also at the University of Minnesota. I like to say I have 3 degrees below zero. And I got my PhD and went out to Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., where I lived for a few years as the research audiologist there, and got direct exposure to the types of acoustic pathology that many veterans and active duty soldiers struggle with. And I was invited to come back to Mayo, where I spent the next 15 years. And then really the second chapter of my career after that, early with research and clinical practice, was focused on the industry side. I joined a competitor to Starkey, where I worked first in education and training. And then I left thinking I wanted to go back into academia, moved down to the University of Miami, thought I'd escape the tundra for once and for all. Lived in Miami Beach, and we were enjoying that, but then had the opportunity to rejoin the industry and come in with Starkey, where I've been for now about a decade. And I've had a variety of roles, as you say, sort of working on different muscle groups, including directing the U.S. sales division, education and training, worked with the VA sales path. So I like to sort of I love the focus on discovery. But if there's one thing that my tenure at Mayo taught me, it was that if you focus persistently on the needs of the end user, of the patient,
Right.
rather than on the discipline, you'll never go wrong. And that's really how they built their institution. It's how this company was founded by Mr. Bill Austin in 1967. And we've been relentlessly focused on hearing and hearing loss, and also focusing on the needs of the patient, because if we help the patient, we're going to help that organization, we're going to help society. And hearing loss, as you know from our past discussions, is a huge societal issue. So I love the combo of the science and technology and the humanistic side. And that's really the sort of wayward path that brought me to this role now, where as Chief Innovation Officer, I say all I do is look out the window and think deep thoughts. But my role now is I reside in R&D, and I work for our Chief Technology Officer, Achin Bomik, but I provide a bridge over into the market development group, sales, marketing, education, and training. I have strong ties in that group, and so I have the privilege of being able to help us launch these products, as well as work with the engineers and with the audiologists involved in the development and verification of the technologies before it comes to market. Then I get to help deliver it. And I even, to this day, am licensed as an audiologist. So I have a small number of patients now, because I can't ever really leave that satisfaction that I get of working with one-on-one with patients.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know how many of our listeners are familiar with Starkey. I mean, I got familiar with it because it was actually the hearing aids that I got when I was first went through the process of, my daughter's a speech language pathologist, and there was somebody on my team whose husband's an audiologist, and they finally beat me into submission 15 years ago to finally get tested out and get fitted for hearing aids, because I just couldn't even host client meetings when I was the CTO at HP in restaurants, because I couldn't hear the conversation. And it was just getting harder and harder for me to do my job because I couldn't hear. But through the process of getting my first hearing aids, I learned a lot about Starkey. Starkey, when you talk about the social connection, it's almost kind of ingrained in the culture at Starkey. Because I know Starkey does a lot of work as far as in different parts of the world, as far as bringing hearing amplification technologies to the parts of the world that don't have access to those capabilities at all, right?
Indeed. From the start, I think, before it was popular to think about philanthropic business, if you will, Bill Austin really had as his grand vision, so the world may hear, or hearing is our concern, and has really spent his career in combination with his wife, Tanny, trying to focus on bringing the benefits of amplification and awareness for the importance of hearing to anyone, no matter where they are, no matter what their situation is. Hearing and hearing loss is a global societal issue.
Mm-hmm.
That now, according to the World Health Organization, nearly 500 million people, 460 million people, have what the WHO considers to be disabling amounts of hearing loss. And only globally, it's less than 10% of the people with hearing loss have the means to do something about it, can afford it, have personnel that can bring that technology to them, or are not stigmatized. There still remains a stigma, unfortunately, related to hearing loss. And your story is not an uncommon one. It's often a 5 to 7 year period of time from the moment that a person begins to realize that he or she has a loss or is told by a family member that he's struggling to when they do something about it. So your story is not unusual. And many times in my career, I've had to arm wrestle with people to try to get them to even try a hearing aid because of that's so stigmatized that they're somehow going to feel older or less valuable. It pains my heart that it still exists, but it's still the case.
Well, and it is, and in my own case, it was I had to instruct my executive assistant to only book me in restaurants and private rooms. It couldn't be like an open floor. If I took Q&A at a speech, somebody had to relay the question to me. There was no way I could hear questions from the deep audience. So I am the poster child for, kicking and screaming coming into the program. So stay right where you're at. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break. We'll continue our conversation with Fabry. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Killer Innovations. We're continuing our conversation with Dave Fabry, Chief Innovation Officer at Starkey. So, Dave, I was the CTO at AHP, which had been around since 1938, right? And you're dealing with when I came in and I was the Chief Technology Officer, which I was the closest thing HP had to having the Chief Innovation role without the title at HP. But it's hard when you are the incumbent, when you're kind of the guy that's been around forever, and whether where people are at on the spectrum of being a follower of Clayton Christensen, talking about disruptions occurring from outside the industry, but that doesn't exclude the incumbents. It doesn't mean that the incumbents always need to get wiped out for a new guy to come in. Talk a little bit about the strategies and the thinking at Starkey relative to being an incumbent with an innovation focus.
Yeah, and ever since I read The Innovator's Dilemma over 20 years ago now, it occurred to me that the hearing aid industry was ripe for disruption just because of a number of the elements that Christensen described. First of all, those different pathways, the different tiers, if you will, from low demanding customers to high demanding would sort of be bounded by something that would buy a personal sound amplification product that you could get over the counter or in the mail, to going to Mayo Clinic and everywhere in between, in private practice and Costco, a whole bunch of different distribution channels. People get complacent with those channels. And the difficulty is that in the US, only about 30% of the people, roughly a third of the people with measurable hearing loss actually wear amplification. If people get too complacent with that and comfortable with the fact that only 1 in 3 do something about it, they leave room, as Christensen described, for a newcomer to come in and disrupt.
Right.
What our mission has been, beginning really with our president, Brandon Sawalich, and then when he hired Achin Bhowmick, who came to us from the perceptual computing division at Intel a few years back, was to self-disrupt our market by still focusing on our core strategy of better hearing, and while also providing, which we did in 2018 with Livio AI, the first hearing aid in the market that employed sensors that are embedded directly in the device that can monitor physical activity and social engagement, and also provide a way to be connected to a smartphone and the internet in ways that really hearing aids hadn't incorporated prior to the introduction of the iPhone and then the Android capabilities. And so by looking at moving hearing aids from single-purpose devices that amplify sound appropriately for a person with hearing loss to multi-purpose, multi-function devices, I like to say our industry has been waiting for its iPhone moment, because in 2007, prior to the launch of the iPhone, adoption rate for smartphones was only about 30%. And now they're ubiquitous. And what Apple did was to move that from a single-purpose device, the phone. The Motorola Razr remains one of my favorite single-purpose phones of all time. But then they turned it into multi-purpose, multi-function. And in so doing, what we want to do is turn hearing aids from something that people have to wear into something that they want to have. and in turn reduce that stigma. I like to say that as a baby boomer, as compared with my parents who really were stigmatized by the thought of hearing aids, I don't have that stigma, but I have much higher expectation for what hearing aids will do for me,
Right.
including streaming and providing translation and transcription and a whole bunch of other features.
There's a topic that we talk a lot about on this show, which is if you're the chief innovation officer inside of an organization, one of the things you have to battle is what I refer to as the innovation antibodies. Those people within the organization that is, oh, we've tried that before, that will never work. I'm the expert. We can't afford that. You know, nobody would ever want that. How do you deal with, you know, with innovation antibodies, or if you think you even have innovation antibodies inside of Starkey?
Sure. I think inside and outside, in the sense that we're predominantly a B2B industry where we
Right.
sell to audiologists and hearing instrument specialists who've operated pretty much the same way until COVID, that they've done for a long time. And there is a bit of that tendency to say, well, that's not the way we've done it. That's not the way we should do it. That's not what our past successes have been based upon. A colleague who's become a friend over the years is Mike Maddock. And he refers to that as sort of inside the jar, outside the jar thinking. And he talks about when you're in an organization as little as 9 months to a year, you move from being outside the jar to inside the jar, and you can't read the label when you're sitting inside the jar. So my battle is constantly, a personal battle, is to always try to keep that outside the jar perspective and try to continue to look at things differently. One way, I guess, is, as I mentioned in the first segment, is by constantly challenging myself to think about what are the needs of the patient. And so I, for the past couple years, I will, when we're coming out with a new product, I'll wear it, even though I still kind of have normal hearing. I have a little bit of damage from drums and motorcycles and typical baby boomer stuff, but I wear the devices, and then I immerse myself not only from an audiologist perspective or someone working in R&D, but from the perspective of a patient. How's the user experience going to be? Do I have delight? Is it the sort of thing that provides inherent value to me that makes me want to put it on every day? And trying to keep that perspective, and then also while working directly with patients when we're trying out new technologies, keeps me fresh.
Well,
Because
and I think that's an important piece. And this is my argument with a lot of organizations that want to initiate some kind of an innovation program, but they think it's a lab-focused activity. You have got to get your butt out of the seat, and you got to go out there where your customers are at. At HP, I used to spend most Saturdays and Sundays standing in Best Buys, and I actually came to Best Buy's main store in Minneapolis many a time and watch customers buy HP product. And if they didn't buy an HP product, then I would ask them why. What was the decision criteria you were in right at that moment? You looked at one of my products, but you chose a competitor. So I'm not trying to change your mind, but why? And it's insight you can only gain because we have to constantly remind ourselves we are not a proxy for our customers.
that's right.
We may
and
think
we, and
we're
we
the
can try
proxy,
to
but
think we are.
you think
but-
you are. You can convince yourself. The engineers will convince themselves, but they are not. Even in the case of hearing aids, if you came to me and said, "Hey, Phil, help us innovate hearing aids," yeah, I'm a user of it, but I'm too much probably into the tech, and I would get into the tech end of it, which means I'm outside the band of the normal target customer. Even for Starkey, it would be to go out and find that typical audience base of customers of Starkeys before you could think about it. Because if I came in, I'd want all the new bells and whistles and features
Yeah.
and functions.
And that's a small segment on
it's
that.
a
on that
very
bell curve.
it's a
very
niche.
small.
It's a niche, and you
Yeah,
got to be
and-
careful that if you use yourself, you're going to get into a niche situation. So stay right where you're at. We'll be right back. We'll continue our conversation with Dave Fabry, Chief Innovation Officer at Starkey. Welcome back to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. Continue our conversation with Dave Fabry, the Chief Innovation Officer at Starkey. So, Dave, in this case, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was about the discussion around engineers. You've got a fairly young staff where you're at, and how do you build into them then the empathy of being able to understand the role of developing technologies for an audience that's not them?
Yeah, I think it's a great point and a great question in the sense that one thing is the technology embedded in the devices, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But the other is the reality is that the average hearing aid user is still around 67 years of age, first time hearing aid user. And increasingly, they're interfacing through their app or the onboard controls. And if they have arthritis, if they have visual impairment, they can't read the fonts that a 25-year-old engineer can. And so we constantly have to put our perspective on that end user, the patient, and then as well as I mentioned earlier, the audiologist or the dispenser. And I think you've really hit on the critical issue that our customers, the audiologists and dispensers face, and that is they have to care. They have to learn. Their secret sauce is they learn what has brought this patient and his family member in with him to proceed with the decision to get hearing aids. And when we design new products now, we're thinking about not only providing the best technology on board the devices, but increasingly taking into consideration other elements that the family member and that the hearing aid user need to consider. And that's really the perspective that we need to constantly focus on our engineering team and on our professional team as we develop and bring these technologies to market.
Well,
For Go
well,
ahead.
one of the challenges, though, with innovations, particularly when you're trying to innovate for an aging population, is the intimidation factor,
Yeah.
right? Too many options, too many choices. For me, I learned in my Starkeys, I had 4 programs I could program. One of them I had custom built program, which allows me to be able to hear questions coming from an audience of 1,000 people in an auditorium, right? And I knew based on the tones, 1 tone, 2 tone, I knew what program I was running, right? But that's
Yep.
me. And I was in
Yeah.
my, and I was,
And you're tech savvy. Yeah.
I was in my early 40s when I got
Right.
my hearing aids, right? But if you gave all those options to my grandmother, who was in her 90s,
Right over her head.
over her
Yeah.
head, how do you
Yeah.
deal with that? What are some of the new things you're doing to try to get over this innovation intimidation factor problem?
It's a great point. Again, as I said, the first thing that most hearing aid users want to do is they want to hear better in quiet and noisy listening environments, and they want to do that effortlessly. They don't want to have to make a lot of adjustments or controls. And if it can be automatic, that's our first goal. So when we're deploying machine learning and artificial intelligence in our devices that analyze the environment and only bring into the features like directionality or noise management, like you say, we're only doing that when it's appropriate. But then you think about the user interface, as you said, that intimidation factor. We want it to be automatic when possible. But on the latest device, we've introduced something called Edge Mode, which uses artificial intelligence and enables the person, when they get into a challenging environment outside of that clinical environment, all they need to do is tap on the side of the device and it will do an acoustic analysis of that environment, remove the normal restrictions that are in place for all around listening, or intensely focused on providing comfort and clarity for that environment and optimize to that environment. And then when they want to go back to the all around listening mode, they double tap again. And all they need, we say it puts the power of AI at their fingertips because they don't have to think about how do I control. They don't even have to use their app. All they need to do is tap. And that's part of that user experience, I think, that simplifies the way that the professional optimizes the device, but they can't be with them all the time. And now they can go into a quiet or noisy listening environment and optimize with only their finger. And that's
Right.
just one example.
Well, it's a great example because I can, from my experience of wearing my hearing aids, certain rooms it worked great. Other rooms, I don't know what it was about the reverberation. If the room had a lot of had a big glass wall in it or whatever, it was problematic. And I'd go back. They'd readjust the programming, right, and then it would work for a different room, but not for that room. You just didn't have the flex. And again, keep in mind that's 15 years ago, right?
Yeah.
It just didn't have the ability to adapt to the real world as an on-the-fly situation. So in the case of applying AI and machine learning, what were the biggest hurdles you had to get over to apply that to something like a hearing aid?
Well, I think the obvious ones were low power and relatively small computing size and storage capacity. So we're having to take advantage of things that the smartphone can deliver us in terms of location services. And we're increasingly partnering with organizations like Apple, like Google, like Amazon to take advantage of cloud computing as well whenever possible. And we can, with permission of the hearing aid user, store and retrieve information that the patient can use to optimize to that environment. But we're also finding that the circuits we have now, that edge mode that I mentioned, all the processing need for edge mode to do that acoustic analysis and adaptation is on board the hearing aids. But a good example of the way that we're incorporating the cloud is with something we call Thrive Care. And that's where family members, with permission of the hearing aid user, can monitor an app that they download, a separate app that doesn't control the instrument, but with permission of the hearing aid user, can allow them to monitor how much physical activity the hearing aid user has had on a daily basis, whether they've socially engaged with other people, even if they've suffered a fall. They can look at that and then have the peace of mind, no matter where they are in the world, they can pull down and retrieve that data from the cloud with permission of the hearing aid user and monitor how active they've been on a daily basis, and maybe call them or text them and encourage them, especially during these times, to be more physically active and more socially engaged, and call on them if they see that they fell to check and see if they're okay.
Well, I think the fall situation was very interesting. You and I talked about this a couple of years ago
Yeah.
when you were in the development of
Yeah.
these new products because, like my grandmother, she lived by herself in Cincinnati. She had her hearing aids, which she put in, most days, not every day, but most days. Um, but we also got her one of those things the pendulums you'd wear around your neck
Right.
to say, hit the button, help, I fall, I can't get up.
Yep.
But she wouldn't bring the pendulum. She left it up next to her bed, or she left it by her chair. She took it off because she was washing dishes in the kitchen, right? And then our biggest fear, my brother and I and my cousins, is that she would fall and not be near her phone, and she
Right.
wouldn't have her pendulum. But here you just
Well,
you're
yeah, you
embedding that
wear the
intelligence.
devices. Yeah, you wear the devices, and then you can select up to 3 contacts as trusted contacts who will receive a text if you fall, and it does that automatically. And then when the recipient looks at the app, they can see that they fell, and they actually, through the location services, see where they were when they fell. So even if they're non-responsive, they know to call emergency services or go and see them themselves if they're local. And that again provides people with the ability to live independently in their own homes longer, while having that peace of mind for the family member who, wherever they are in the world, may worry about mom or dad or family member falling. And we've heard many stories from people who've felt as though this had a significant impact on that person's ability to live independently for as long as they can.
Correct. And aging in place is absolutely critical. There's just aren't enough nursing homes
Right.
to take care of us as an aging population. I tell all my friends who are boomers, you better be really nice to your kids because they get to pick your nursing home, and if you
Yeah.
can't find a place in a nursing home, you're moving in with your kids, right? So be nice to your kids. Um,
Exactly.
but one of the things and I've been following the introduction of the new products from Starkey that I think is, well, it's very interesting for me. Is it used to be with hearing aids, you had to have some kind of another box that then Bluetooth to your phone. So you Bluetooth to
Right.
the box, and then the box then interfaced to the hearing aids. But the audio quality was always kind of like, yeah, you know. And I would take my hearing aids out. I would wear my Bose. I'm a big fan of Bose. I have my Bose earbuds in, type of a thing. And then I take them out, put my hearing aids back. So I'm constantly was switching between. But you guys have kind of solved this now. Bluetooth direct to the hearing aid.
Yeah. We're using Bluetooth Low Energy from iPhones since 2014. And then more recently now using Bluetooth Low Energy with Google Pixel phones and Samsung Galaxy phones. We'll stream directly from the phone to the instruments. And even accessories. One thing I didn't mention is now we have 2.4 Bluetooth accessories. A remote microphone in a noisy environment can really help with that as well. But this ease of use for the streaming directly from Android or iPhone platforms enables people with hearing loss to become as addicted to their technology as the rest.
We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to Innovations as we're wrapping up today's show with Dave Fabry, the Chief Innovation Officer at Starkey. So, Dave, as we got right down to the clock in the last segment, I wanted to give you an opportunity, though. We were talking about specifically, when you think about how small the compute platform is in hearing aids, the ability to cram more and more features. I mean, yes, you have your version of Moore's Law, but it's still, it's like how much stuff can you put into a 5-pound bag, right?
Right.
But some of the new things, particularly, with the ability to better integrate into the devices we carry, so we don't end up having to swap hearing aids out. You don't get into this, like for me, the constant swapping problem that I used to have.
Exactly. And it's really that multifunctionality, the ability to stream audio, whether it's music or media or podcast from an Android or iPhone directly to the instruments. We want to provide them, the issues for the hearing aid user to not feel the urge to take their devices out when they go to the gym, when they're streaming podcasts or streaming music. And that's really our challenges. We're not only competing with our incumbent competitors, but increasingly consumer electronics, because we know that the younger users still want to be active and they have higher expectations for when and where the devices will work. And to wit, the special situation provided by COVID has been telehealth. I first did telehealth when I was still at Mayo Clinic back in 1994 and did remote reprogramming of digitally programmable devices. The adoption rate of telehealth across a wide variety of industries has been relatively low until recently. But what we've seen is not only for those patients who are unable or unwilling to go out and see the professional, but also the younger professionals who are busy and are working and don't want to take the time off have pushed that need for telehealth. And we're seeing these types of things that are innovations that are occurring beyond what goes in the ear or in the circuit as really being the way that we see the wave of the future for the hearing aid to be that multi-purpose, multi-function, multi-environment device that can be optimized by the professional.
Yeah, and one of the unique challenges for in your case, for your industry, the hearing aids, is not that dissimilar to the problem I had when I was at HP, which was when you're building portable, mobile, consumer-facing devices, is battery life.
Yeah.
Right? How do you squeeze out? A little bit of optimization can have a huge impact, but battery power density per cubic centimeter of material is only going up 10% a year. So you're not going to get it with new battery chemistry. Everybody thinks lithium ion's the magic answer. You're not going to get there. Your electronics and the efficiency is really where the game is at. What's Starkey doing? Because, you could put a lot of stuff into a hearing aid, but if it only lasts 4 hours where you got to charge it or swap it out, it's not really useful.
Yeah, a couple things. There's been a very rapid transition to rechargeable batteries in the past few years. And so the game changed in the sense, instead of having an expectation that a zinc air battery would last 2 weeks or a week, now we're in the daily recharge cycle and ritual like you have if you have an Apple Watch or your iPhone or your Android phone. And so, but you're right, the charge density limits it so that now our expectation is that people get 24 hours of battery life. But during COVID, many people are streaming webinars. I stream them through my hearing aids. And so if ever there is a case where there's higher consumption for streaming, we also have a turbocharger, which in our industry, 7 minutes on this, roughly the time of a coffee break, will deliver 20% more battery life in 7 minutes. So we're looking at other solutions that provide that ability if we push the limits of what our battery life is, that will top off the battery and prevent range anxiety, if you will.
Right. Well, and I
But
think
we're seeing a rapid transition from replaceable to rechargeable batteries like everything else. But then we have the expectation of all day use. And that's the limitation, as you said, in terms of the efficiency of the drivers for the speakers, the circuitry that we're using, the connection to the devices and to the cloud. All are factors that we have to be critically aware of, and every milliamp counts.
Yeah, well, it's interesting in the fact that what you were describing is a way when you're doing innovation, it's always not about the tech. It's about understanding how what the user's satisfaction will be and other ways to do it. So it doesn't mean I got to get I got to make a bigger hearing aid to fit a bigger battery in or something like that. It was like, hey, if I can do a fast charging mechanism, I solve the problem without having to go, and drive create a big honking, battery hanging off your ear.
Mhm.
Um, but it proves the point that there's other ways to innovate. You don't always have to just continue to push in the same direction within the same technologies.
Exactly. It's thinking about from the user experience and thinking about it a little differently and thinking of the innovations that occur in the ear and in the cloud and in the phone and how we can collaborate with all of those without having to reinvent the wheel. The hearing aid industry too often has tried to do everything on their own. And that's where we see the benefit of partnering with companies in Silicon Valley and around the world who are experts in their areas. And then we focus on the hearing piece and how we can think differently to move in new directions.
Yeah. So, Dave, if listeners want to keep track of what you're up to, what's going on, the innovations at Starkey, what's the best place where they can find out that information?
Come to starkey.com, starkey.com, and they can get a host of different information on latest products, on the executive team. I'm on there as well. We're on social media as well on Facebook. I'm DFAB1959. Go figure out what that is. And we're pretty active on all of those media, but come and look. And I think you might be surprised about what modern hearing aids can do once you look under the hood a little bit.
So, Dave, and we'll have all those links over on the Killer Innovation show notes. Dave, thanks a lot for joining us here on Killer Innovations.
It's my pleasure.
So as you wrap up today's show, I just want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here. Check out the show notes over at Killer Innovations. The one favor I would ask of you is if you are enjoying the shows, give us some feedback. Let us know. Post a comment over on iTunes, Google Play, iHeart, Spotify, wherever you happen to catch the podcast. We've been around for, this is season 16. We started in 2005, before iTunes even existed. So there's lots of great content. You can go back through the catalog, check it all out, and let us know. We're always looking for ideas for new guests. So if you come across, whether you watched a YouTube video or somebody in your company that you think would be a great guest, just drop me a note over at phil@killerinnovations.com. It comes directly to me, so check that out. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
This show is distributed by the Innovators Network. For more information and other great shows and content, visit theinnovators.network.